is all of a sudden you got disrupted from what your routine was. And then you had time to think, is this even the routine that I want?
If all we're doing is like racing from one thing to the next, we are never going to have the opportunity to be able to step back and reflect.
Because now we all have a story on speed dial that allows us to say, wait, is this autopilot the autopilot I want to be riding?
And ask some really basic questions like, gosh, this thing that I'm racing around doing, should I be doing it at all?
Hi, friends. Today I have Dorie Clark on the podcast. She is all things amazing. I recently read her book, The Long Game. She has a whole bunch of other books out there too that are all good, and online courses and online community that do meetups and all these other exciting pieces. We talk about white space. We talk about resilience. We talk about the course that her life took and all the magic she shares with the world, and when the no's really led her to great yeses. So listen in. It's actually one of my favorite podcasts that I've interviewed and had a privilege to share with you. Today, I have Dorie Clark on the podcast, and I'm fangirling like big time. She is amazing, and I'm so excited to go through her story because I have so many questions that I want to connect the dots on. So Dorie, thanks for joining me today.
Jen, thank you. Great to connect.
Yes. Okay, so I'm reading your latest book, The Long Game. And I'm writing a book. So seeing somebody's cover and how cool this is, that takes work. Nice job.
Thank you. I can't really take credit for it because the designers did it, but I can take credit for expending huge amounts of political capital to make sure they didn't give me a crappy cover. So I feel very proud of the one we ended up with.
I'm in the cover game right now, and it is a game. I mean, it is things. There's things that go into writing books that no one tells you about. Spacing, fonts, page, all of it. And then book, color, covers, angles, sides. It's been overwhelming. Okay, so one of the parts in the beginning of this book, you are at a party and everybody's talking about whether they've published a book or had a baby or done some of this thing. And at the time you had done neither. And now we fast forward to you as this phenom that you are today. Like, I want to talk about who you were younger, why that had such an impact on you, and what that propelled into you to make possible.
Well, thank you, Jen. There is a quote by Longfellow that I feel like is really apt, which is, we judge ourselves by what we feel capable of doing, but other people judge us by what we have done. And that can be unfortunate sometimes because for a lot of us, we know that we're capable of great things. We know we're capable of more, but if it hasn't happened yet, and, that certainly doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It could just be that, things take a while. There is often this really painful gap in terms of what we know ourselves to be and then how the outside world is seeing us. And so you're exactly right. Years ago, was at this gathering and it was super uncomfortable because it was a group of people that I was sitting with who kind of all knew each other. They had all gone to college together and they were just like rattling off all of their achievements and all of the other people's, that they knew achievements. And I mean, it literally was that. Like they hadn't seen each other in a while. And so they're like, oh, whatever happened to so-and-so? Oh, well, he's on his third book. And I'm just sitting there like, wow, kind of feeling like an idiot and wanting to somehow be able to show the world like, hey, I can do cool things too. But that, in many ways, it's kind of the premise of my new book, The Long Game, because there's sort of this inchoate desire to accomplish big things. But the tricky part is that if it's a really meaningful goal, it often does take longer than we want. And the perseverance that's necessary in the face of it taking a while is really the key difference in terms of who's able to get there and who isn't.
It is. And our things like that, we get triggered different ways at different times in our lives. I think if we're open to listening. And then all of a sudden, oh, that's a trigger to you to say, okay, I'm going to have a story the next time these people get together and I'm going to start living this right now. Right. And so you left that conversation and then what happens? Like, give us a little timeline of events in your life.
Well, in the spirit of things taking longer than you want them to, this was in 2008 when this happened. And so for 2009, my grand New Year's resolution was I'm going to get a book deal. This is the year I am going to get a book deal. And so I ended up approaching it in literally the exact wrong way that a person should do it, which is that I sat down and for the first half of the year, I basically wrote 3 completely different book proposals. And my idea was like, I'll just write 3 different ones and they'll want one of these. But what I quickly discovered, unfortunately, was that there was a common denominator between these 3 book proposals, which was me. And the problem was they didn't want me. I was not famous enough. And so I got turned down. All the proposals got turned down because they basically said like, who the F are you? And so I needed to go back to the drawing board, and that was painful. But it ultimately took me an additional 2 years. So I started all this in 2009, but I had to go back in 2011. I finally got my book deal for my first book as a result of a lot of yeoman's work that I had done in blogging and trying to sort of build up a brand or get my ideas out there more. And then my book came out my first book, Reinventing You, in 2013. So it was about a 5-year journey between sitting there at that party and being able to have a book that I could wave around. That's sort of the uncomfortable liminal space that we need to live in sometimes.
And okay, so 5 years is still actually pretty reputable in the book industry. So let's be real to everybody listening. Okay, this isn't forever. I mean, it's not right away, but it's not forever. You said, okay, they don't know who I am. I'm going to build up my reputation. I'm going to start blogging. Then I'm going to do this book. Why Reinventing You first? Why was it that one?
I was somebody who really wanted to write a book from the time I was a kid, honestly. And the honest to God truth is that I kind of didn't even care what the book was. I just wanted to do a book so badly. And so I had different ideas. Some of them were good, some of them were not so good. But Reinventing You was actually the one. And I feel like this was a good lesson for me because we often try to over engineer things and, just think about, oh, well, what's optimal? And we try to be so smart. And oftentimes the universe tells us if we're willing to listen. We just kind of have to let go of holding the process so tightly. And so in the course of writing these blogs and, trying to build my platform, I started writing for Harvard Business Review. And one of the articles that I wrote was called How to Reinvent Your Personal Brand. And this was not meant to be a sort of grand statement or, maybe I'll write a book about this. It was just literally an article I could write. It was an idea I had, but it turned out it was a better idea than I thought it was. And so HBR picked it up and they ran it first as a blog on the website. And then there was some kind of, there was like a luck factor because an article they had been expecting fell through. The person didn't do it. And they had a hole that they needed to fill in the magazine. And so they asked me, hey, we like that article. Will you write a magazine article about it? So they wanted me to write, this longer version, which I did. And then once that came out, I immediately within a week got 3 different literary agents reaching out to me saying, oh, hey, have you thought of turning this into a book? Which was incredibly remarkable because I had just spent the previous 2 years like begging people to look at my ideas and, being fired by 2 different book agents because they couldn't sell anything. So it was a pretty remarkable turn of events that 3 different ones were reaching out to me. So that was when I understood like, oh, there is really a qualitative difference between ideas that no one wants and ideas that everybody wants. And you have to just kind of learn to, to be loose enough so that you can see it when it's in front of your face.
And let's not skip over the fact that you're hustling enough so that when the opportunity arises, you're there, right? Because you are pushing all the time behind the scenes and then something else fell apart, which you called lucky, which I call always being on the game. Like I'm in the game when number 1 needs a timeout, number 2 will come in and maybe number 1 won't be able to play again because I just got put in the game, coach. So there you go.
That's right. That's right. Now, Jen, tell me about your book.
Yeah, so my book is a lot like your book, okay? No, it's not, but it is. It's from the standpoint of no one wants a memoir. And no one wants a book about mountaineering. Okay. So I just became the first female in the world to climb the 7 second summit. So the second highest point in each continent.
I heard that. Mazel tov.
I know. I got to say it a whole bunch of times because I'm still trying to make sure it's real in my head. So I'm repeating. But so Scott Miller is like, I go out to lunch with him. I'm sharing some stories and he's like, you have a book in you. And then he tells me, but it can't be a memoir and it can't be a mountaineering book. I'm like, the only stories I've told you are the stories of my experience mountaineering. I'm a little confused here. So he has me work with a writer who helps me get ideas on paper. And then we work with another writer to maybe understand the assignment a little bit better. And then I'm on my third writer and we have a book coming out January 16. And I can't wait till everybody reads it because to me, it's a mountaineering memoir that has lessons that help you apply to life and business, but we'll see how it goes. But it's been a war. It's been a war.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's really interesting. I mean, there's precedent. My mother, who is not a business person and is definitely not a mountaineer, she actually, I'm looking it up to see if I can remember this. She was so psyched a few months ago. She heard on like a podcast or something, like one of her favorite people recommended this book, and she flipped out. Yes. I'm sure you probably listed it as one of your comps. It's called High Altitude Leadership. Have you heard of that one? And my mom was so into it, and she was just reading it, and she ultimately gave it to me to read, but she was just like, oh my God. And then blah, blah, blah. And then there was a whiteout, and then the person, and then they walk past the bodies and they're like, oh, that's Flo down there. She's been there for 5 years. she was riveted.
Skittle Lane. There's a lane that we call Skittle Lane because all you see is white. There's in the mountaineering, you only have white, the color of the sky, the sun, and maybe some black on some rocks that's poking through the white. And then all of the people that have not made it, those aggressive, ambitious humans going up these big mountains that did not quite make it, all are kind of lined up. And it looks like someone emptied a bag of Skittles because it's all the colors of their outfits and it's terrible. But I'm just telling you.
I mean, that's amazing. So yes, I know what I'm going to be getting my mom as a present, and that is your book. So
I'm signing it. I'll even give her a mountaineering photo in there. I promise you, we'll be good. So you have this book come out because you finally hit the sweet spot of, hey, this is what the market wants. Literary agents are finding you. You launch it. And then what happens?
It's a process, and it is exciting things and banal things, right? In some ways, the book unlocked a lot of things for me. One notable one, which books are good for, as you know, is that I was able to really start speaking for money for the first time. And that was really cool. I mean, I had spoken before, but it was always this local thing, and you'd speak for free and maybe you'd get a client, that kind of thing. But being a keynote speaker is a different animal, and it's very cool. And you don't always need a book for that, but you often need a book for that. And so it really unlocked that and made that possible. So that was pretty cool. Also, it is rather well known that publishers do not necessarily prepare you that well for what it's like to launch a book. And which is kind of stunning because they do so many of them. But I just remember feeling like I was just hit with a tsunami. I knew some authors, but now I know a million authors. But with your first book, I knew a handful of authors. I was like, gosh, what should I do? What should I think about? But it's just not systematized in any way. And so I remember feeling so incredibly adrift and overwhelmed because I wasn't sure what to do to promote things, or, how to do it right, or what was a good response and what was a not good response. I had no idea. So it was a lot.
It is a lot. They don't tell. Okay. Just so everybody that's listening, writing the book, one is a war, but it's 50% of it maybe. maybe 25% of it. There is so much more that goes in behind the scenes that, like, how do you promote it? What ways do you want to promote it? How do you get testimonials? Who's reading it? All these little details. Website, you have to have a website for your book. I mean, it is like its own little zip code in life over here, just to let you know. It's crazy.
It is absolutely crazy. Yeah.
Okay, so then you liked it so much you wrote another one.
Yeah, I realized that, the idea of being able to share your ideas, being able to, what I had wanted to do originally professionally was be a university professor. I still do that some now. I do some business school teaching, but my original dream for myself was that I wanted to get a PhD. I wanted to be a literature professor, and I ended up getting turned down by all of the schools that I applied to. So that did not happen. And so I think in some ways, writing books for me, it's essentially an alternative way of scratching the same itch, which is, I like ideas. I like thinking about things. I like, sort of reflecting them back and kind of making them my own. And so this became a really cool way to be able to do that.
And you not only, where you're the master, master seems masculine. I don't know how to make that a feminine term, but where you're the master is not only writing the book, but all the things after the book, the digital courses, the speaking, the packaging of it all, and doing all of that. How did you come with that wherewithal? Like, how did you turn like the whole branding piece of it? Because that's really a talent.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I didn't necessarily start out with a huge amount of branding knowledge per se. My first few jobs that I had, which kind of became the grab bag on which everything else was built, was that for about a year I was a political reporter. That was what I did after I got turned down by the grad school programs, and so I thought, all right, well, I can do journalism, and I did, but not for long because the industry was collapsing. So I got laid off after about a year. And then I worked on political campaigns, and I did press for the campaigns. So I learned about kind of marketing and publicity in that way, at least around, political candidates. But my candidates all lost. And so try again. So then I ended up running a nonprofit for 2 years. It was tiny, 3-person nonprofit. And that was actually extremely instructive in terms of how to run a business, or, like just kind of having to hustle and do all the things yourself. So it was very good training, although sort of in a convoluted way. But that was how I learned marketing and branding, was just through those things. And I started my own consulting business in 2006. And I just realized if I was going to be successful, I had to get out there. I had to market myself, and I had to figure it out. And so marketing and branding was a product of necessity for me, that I knew that the difference between professional survival or not for me was learning how to somehow attract the right people to what I was doing.
And the unique thing about you is that people have been on that journey and they pull up the ladder. You've been on that journey and you've laid the concrete, so the path is smoother for everybody else. So why the different approach?
Oh, well, first of all, it's very kind. I appreciate it. But, I think for me, I mean, people sort of throw around the term a lot about, having like a scarcity mentality or something like that. But I think that it is a useful frame about, whether people in the world think that there is a limited pie or not. And I have just never been troubled by that, because what I have seen is that if I get business or not, or if I get a speech or not, or, whatever it is so vanishingly rare that the reason I don't get something is because of another person. I mean, maybe I don't get it because they decided to do something else, or I don't get it because maybe I screwed it up, and they just didn't like me. Or maybe I don't get it because they decide, oh, we have an in-house resource that can do it. But the idea of like me being threatened by another person doing something similar, I mean, it just seems crazy. Like, to me, that only comes from a lack of self-esteem, because a person would have to believe, I am fundamentally interchangeable with an alternative. They do exactly the same thing that I do in exactly the same way. And so therefore that person is a threat to me. But I don't believe that. I don't think that other people are interchangeable with me. If you want somebody else, to be the speaker, to be the consultant, whatever it is, it's because you want a different topic that I don't do, or you want a different flavor or vibe or approach or whatever. And that's cool. But it's not like, oh, I lost it. It's like it was never mine because you wanted a different thing. Like, who cares? There's plenty. And so I feel like I have enough self-esteem to know that if people want me, they want me. And if they want something else, like, God bless. Like, why don't I help that person figure out how they can self-actualize? And then, they will be happy and appreciative. And that's great. But they're not taking anything from me. So yeah, I think that's the vibe that I've always been going for.
No, I love that vibe. And I'm even thinking, so I just recently talked to somebody that curates TEDx events. And she was giving me the kind of the backstage view of how things get put together. And she goes, Jen, here's the thing. If you want to start applying to TEDx events to do some speaking things, you have to understand that the curator is putting on a show. So if they don't want you or don't like you, it's not that they don't like you. It's that their show already has that slot filled, or they have to look at the overarching piece that they're putting together. And right now that just doesn't fit in. So you should apply to these different ones. And just having that reframe, right? The reframe of, hey, it wasn't mine anyways. So let me cheerlead you and help you get there because someday it will come full circle. Or guess what? It's a bigger picture that I don't understand and it's not personal. So why would we make it personal? I think a lot of us can get stuck in that trap. So I like how you're using that word there because that helps. Okay, are we to the long game yet, or do we have another book in between?
But yeah, I did after Reinventing You, I did a book called Stand Out: How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. And then after that, I did one called Entrepreneurial You, which is about creating multiple revenue streams in your business and having a portfolio career.
Yes, and then the long game. What one was your favorite one to write?
I mean, probably it was the long game. I think I'm getting better with every book. I mean, I like to think anyway that the practice is helpful and that they're getting snappier and snappier the more experience I get.
Do we have another one coming?
Not soon, because I decided that the best way that I could honor the long game is to really live out the value of not just jumping to the next thing, but instead taking the time necessary to put it out and to to properly promote it.
You talk about the wave. You're riding the wave.
That's right.
I just got done with this quest June 1st, and the number one question I get asked all the time is like, what's your next thing? I'm like, I'm just enjoying the thing that I just did, FYI, and we're going to let this ride a little bit before we worry about the next thing. And it kind of goes into your book a little bit, which is why I loved reading it, and I just reread it, because the white space. People always like to steal our white space, and that white space is a special thing to hold on to. So let's talk to the audience about the white space.
You are so right, Jen. The world is full of white space stealers, and we need to be very, very vigilant about fighting back, because the truth is no one else is going to do it for us. And most people are familiar with the term, but for those who aren't, I mean, literally it means white space. Like if you have a paper calendar, it is the part that is not taken up with your pencil scratched meetings that you have etched in. If you have an electronic calendar, it is the white space that is there, rather than the blue or the green or whatever blocks where you're having a meeting, you're having a call, you're having a this, you're having a that. For so much of us, our lives are broken up into these hour or half hour increments, and they're back to back. I mean, certainly the pandemic was horrifying for this, where we'd be sitting at our desks for like 14 straight hours, just having these back to back meetings and never leaving our desk. And that's not a way a person can really think. If we think about long-term thinking or strategic thinking, it's not that it takes a huge amount of time, but it does take some time. And if all we're doing is like racing from one thing to the next, we are never going to have the opportunity to be able to step back and reflect and ask some really basic questions like, gosh, this thing that I'm racing around doing, should I be doing it at all?
Yes, right? I mean, that was the gift of COVID. Is all of a sudden you got disrupted from what your routine was. And then you had time to think, is this even the routine that I want? Like, is this the story that I'm writing? If I was to die tomorrow, was this? No. And so they had a big shakeup, which I think was a blessing because now we all have a story on speed dial that allows us to say, wait, is this autopilot the autopilot I want to be writing?
That's right. Exactly.
Okay, so how do you hold on to your white space? Because it's hard. It gets violated. That white space gets dirty fast.
Oh my goodness, that's for sure. Well, I think there's some basic principles that we have to apply, and I think at its core, one of the things that we have to become mindful of is the fact that nobody really explicitly says this, but the older we get and the more experience we get in our careers, we need to consciously sort of ratchet it up every couple of years to make it harder to, for people to get at us essentially, or, make it harder for requests to come through. Because, early on in your career, you don't have a lot going on. Like if a person wants to have a coffee, random person, random coffee, it's kind of like, well, why not? Life could take me exciting places. Like, we don't know. But if you are a busy person that actually has a lot of requests coming in, and I think honestly, a lot of folks, they just literally have no idea. They have no idea what's on the other side. And they're like, why didn't that person say yes? Well, if 10 people are asking them every week for coffee, it would literally ruin them if they said yes to everybody. It would destroy their productivity. It would destroy their ability to get anything meaningful done. And so we need to create, some boundaries. So a really simple one that I suggest, which at first, it seems a little ridiculous, but I had to learn to implement it. Many times people, either because they're not being conscious or, they're just not thinking about it, or sometimes because they actually do want to kind of slip one past you, they will reach out and they'll be super vague. They'll be like, hey, Jen, I need a few minutes of your time. Can we hop on a call? And I used to assume that the other person must have a really good reason for asking for that time. They, and they're probably not telling me because, oh, it's a private thing. It's an important thing. Like that must be it. And then you realize like, nope. Sometimes, it could be the stupidest thing in the world that you never would have agreed to if they had told you what it was. But, for them, it's important. But people can be ridiculous when, in terms of their level of consideration in thinking about you or your needs. And so we have to force them. It is not at all inappropriate. And I now mandate that if I'm going to meet with anyone, I have to know in advance, what is it about? I will not agree to a meeting unless I just say, oh, great. What would you like to meet about? So that I have a fair opportunity to decide if I want to do it or not.
I have it where you have to send me an agenda. I want the agenda of what we're discussing. And then it benefits both of us because one, if I can't help you, now I can say, oh, I know somebody who can. Here you go. Bypass the 30 minutes out of both of our time and let me get you to really where you want to go. And if I can help you, I'm here. And if I can't help you, we didn't waste any more time. Thank you, friends.
I love it. So that's a really good one. What are some other ways that you protect your white space? It sounds like this is a thing you've thought about a lot.
Oh, this is a thing I think about because, well, I climb mountains. Okay. Like, let me tell you about, no one can reach you on the side of a mountain. There's no Wi-Fi. There's no cell service. There's no nothing. You feel like you're accomplishing something because you're moving up something and then you come back down and you're disconnected from the world for a week, typically at a time. So mountaineering was this perfect escape to my crazy. And then what happens in the mountaineering world to the nth degree is that you have sensory deprivation. I don't have smells because snow, like there's nothing that smells unless it's you, which is not a good sign. I don't have sounds really because there's not animals, there's no smell. I remember coming down from K2 and we had been there for a few weeks and all of a sudden we started walking into an area where there was sweetgrass. And I hadn't, I'm like, oh my goodness, this smells absolutely amazing. How wonderful. And then you smell dirt. You're like, oh, and I can go outside nowadays here. I can't smell dirt. I'm like, there's so many smells going on around outside that like, you're so inundated. And I always come back to the mountains thinking, oh, I had visual deprivation. I had sound deprivation. You have flavor deprivation and food because food doesn't taste like anything at altitude and all the other kind of stuff. You get back into a red light and you feel, okay, overwhelmed. Like, let me stop at this hotel for a second and before I enter anything further into society. And so on a quarterly basis, I'll go through my calendar and first I block out white time on my calendar and then we build around it.
Yeah, that's so nice. That's so important. More people should do that.
And go mountaineering. It's way fun. It teaches you that the world goes on whether you're there or not. All the things that you thought you were so critical for, it doesn't matter. Just to let you know. So,
how did you get into that, Jen? Was that a thing that you had always independently wanted to do, or did you somehow get like swept up into it and then, it became a thing?
oh, you want to hear this crazy story? I'll like give
Yeah.
the abbreviated version. So I am doing autopilot in life and I like sold myself on the story that I'll get to me later. I'm going to raise these 7 kids and then it's my turn. And I'll, all the stuff that gives us excuses that society like supports, right? I never is going to say you're a bad mom because you put yourself on hold. You're a great mom because you self-sacrificed. No, you're not. You're a better mom when you actually take care of yourself and everybody around you instead of self-sacrifice. But that's not the message that's as clearly given in society. So I get into this horrific car crash that should have taken my life and didn't. And then I made like right when the car accident happened, I negotiated with death and I said, I'll do something important with my life if you please let me live. And so I lived and then I'm like, shit, now I have to do something important with my life. What is this going to be? And like crazy story, a girlfriend of mine was running on a trail a few weeks later, slipped on a rock, hit her head, never came home. Like a trail that you push a stroller on, friends. And so then all of a sudden I came to this realization. I don't get to choose when I die, but I sure get to choose how I live. And so I better start focusing on how I'm living. Fast forward a little bit. We have my 40th birthday coming up to age me, for everybody listening. And I'm like, I'm going to do something magnificent for my 40th birthday. So I'm going to climb this mountain called Ama de Blanc in Nepal. It's the Paramount Pictures logo. It's gorgeous. And I'm training for it. And COVID strikes. So now I'm homeschooling 7 beautiful children that I did not want to homeschool.
What is the age range of the 7 kids that you were homeschooling there?
7 children. Like, it is not, 7 children is fine because they parent each other until you have them wrapped in a house and we can't go anywhere because of COVID. And then it is a lot of children.
How old was the oldest and how young was the youngest?
Okay. So COVID's 3 years ago. So I have to go back. Well, I have 7 kids in 6 years and 2 months. Okay. So my oldest at the time was like 13, 14. And then my youngest was whatever under that, right? 6.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So my son's like complaining about his math. And I'm like, we do hard things. And he goes, if we do hard things, why are you climbing a mountain called I'm a Dumb Blonde instead of a real mountain like Mount Everest? I said, Ama de Blanc, not I'm a Dumb Blonde, but thank you, sweetheart. We'll look at Everest. So then we looked at Everest. By the end of the week, I had a coach hired. I'm like, I'm climbing Everest, blah, 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 blah. If this is what he perceives as big, we do big things and I'll do it. Never had slept in a tent overnight, but we're okay. We'll figure it out. Anyways, then I hire a coach. He tells me to buy this book. I buy this book. This lady got a Guinness World Record in the front. I'm feeling like I'm the worst mom in the world. And the only thing my kids will read is Guinness World Record books. So I'm complaining to him about that. And this book that he gets me to buy about training, this chick got a Guinness World Record. I'm like, I could have done that one. I can suffer. And he's like, well, I'll come up with something. I said, I'm not growing pumpkins and I'm sure not speed eating hot dogs. So whatever. And so then a few months later, he calls me. He's like, Jen, I got the perfect record. 7-second summit, 7 continents, 7 mountains, 7 kids. Sounds like a jackpot. And I'm like, let's try it. Well, then I went to do Ama de Blanc for the first time. Oh, friends. Like talk about hook, line, and sinker into the most magnificent experience of my life.
Wow, that was such a cliffhanger. I think you froze for a minute there.
Yeah, no. Sorry. I didn't mean, yeah. No, it was just magic. And it was just, my house is, I have wonderful children, but it was busy. And mountaineering was this silent white space of reconnecting. And then I was doing these mountains, visiting places in different parts of the world, and recognizing needs that I didn't even know existed. And then being able to help. Like, I went to Kenya and I got involved with this period project thing. And we brought and then I realized like women didn't go to school there for a week out of the month because of that. Like, you just the aware. I mean, I'm so humbled that this journey picked me and I stepped into it, because it's awesome. Like it's my favorite part of life. Like, the whole thing has been my favorite part of life on all levels. My kids were a part of it. I was a part of it. And then what became possible because I stepped into it were people that I'll never see or whatever. It's like, it's all the things. So there's my long story of how I got into mountaineering and why I love it. It's amazing.
Wow. That's super cool. That is super cool.
When you have that white space and you listen to the universe, it kind of sends you on these paths.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now that you've completed this goal, are you planning to keep mountaineering as just an ongoing part of your life?
So I think, okay, so in April of 2024, I am going to bring a group of people up to Everest Base Camp, because that hike into Everest Base Camp, with that culture and the people and the time away from all of this stuff, was probably one of the most transformative treks I've ever done. And, when something transforms you, you want to share it with everybody because you want them to have that same feel. And that's what I'm hoping to do. And yeah, it's like why you write books, because that one person tells you that it gave them permission to try or to do or to become. And I'll write a book every single day if that's going to help somebody else have a better life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And so it's fun. So what do you see your future being? Like, where do you want to go? You're going to ride the long game for a long game, right? Which I love. But what else? Because like you said, 20% of your time should be spent on doing new things or experiential things. So what does that look like in your life?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're exactly right. I mean, what you're of course alluding to for folks who haven't read the book is that in the long game, I talk about the importance. Much like Google recommends to its employees that they spend up to 20% of their time on these kind of discretionary projects, these sort of, experiments that may pay off or may not pay off. But, the nature of the experiment is like, if it pays off, it might pay off big, right? Which is how Gmail was invented, was, on 20% time. And I'm a believer that all of us need to have our own version of 20% time in terms of like these side things that we're developing, whether it's, training for something or skills or, just some emerging thing. So in a lot of ways, I'm still working on figuring out what that might look like ultimately. But one of the quests that I did talk about in the book as well is that since 2016, so we're now, as we're filming this, 7 years into the journey, I basically committed my 20% time to working on learning how to write musical theater. And so I have been assiduously pursuing that. My goal, which I created in 2016, I had a 10-year goal to try to write a show that would make it to Broadway. And so that is still my goal. We're getting, ominously close now, but also I'm making pretty good progress. And so earlier this year, a show which I've written, I've completed it, had a reading that was staged by an off-Broadway theater. And, we have preliminary interest from them about, there's many hoops that need to be hurdled, but they are potentially interested in doing an off-Broadway run. So, we're working towards that. So I'm really excited about that as kind of an interesting creative endeavor. And in a lot of ways for me, this is kind of, it's like my test, my experimental test area to prove out some of the principles that I talk about in the rest of my work around how do you go from essentially zero. I mean, I literally knew nothing about writing musical theater to, hopefully being able to have a meaningful and successful career. And what does that arc look like? And how do you establish yourself in a kind of methodical way so that hopefully you can gain the respect of important people and build a strong reputation for yourself. So I am attempting to do in a new field the process that I have articulated in books like Stand Out, and in, I run an online course and community called Recognized Expert. And so I'm trying my best to walk the talk.
I love it. And here's the cool thing about these big audacious goals, right? Like, so listen, she knew nothing. She set a goal for 10 years. She's making progress. But when we set huge goals, if it takes twice as much time or time and a half to make it happen, we're still happy because it was like so much further along than where we were. When people said, well, what happens if you don't summit Everest? Well, I tried. Like, how magic is it that I showed up and tried? And if it takes me a couple times, I'll do it. And luckily, I only had to do it once. But these big goals are what give us something to play for and experiment and explore and just find out who we are in the pursuit.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, there's a quote which I believe is attributed to Thoreau, but it's one of these things like, is it Mark Twain? Is it Will Rogers? Like everybody just like throws the same names. But anyway, I think it's supposed to be, one of the transcendentalists. But anyway, it's nice. And it is, basically like, don't worry too much if you reach for the moon and you fail, because you're still going to get a star. And it's like, yeah, that's right.
I'll take the star. The star's happy. Come on.
Exactly.
Okay, and I think one of your superpowers, which is why your books do so well, is you're so good at systematizing or frameworking thing or giving structure so that we have something to anchor into on our pursuit in these different pieces. How have you trained your brain to do that and then also communicate that to all of us so we feel these big things are manageable and bite-sized bit forwards?
Yeah, well, thank you. For me, I think that one of the reasons why hopefully I've been able to come up with reasonably clear ways that people can follow some of this is that I really am kind of the crash test dummy in a lot of ways for the things that I'm talking about. So, when it comes to Stand Out, for instance, that's a book basically about how to become a thought leader, how to become a recognized expert in your industry. And that was something that I really wanted to do, but I didn't know how to do it. And so writing the book was my learning project. It was my excuse to interview people that I admired, whether it was Daniel Pink or Tom Peters or Robert Cialdini, or just people who were sort of like legends in the world, the sort of business world that I wanted to inhabit, and understand and really drill in and ask nosy questions about how they had done it. And so I tried to apply that and then share that knowledge. Similarly, with my book, Entrepreneurial You, that was kind of my response to, like I had spent the last few years before that trying to become a recognized expert. And then, sort of realizing like, all right, I was making decent money, but I was looking around and there were people that I knew and I'm like, oh my God, they're making a lot of money. Like, what are they doing here? And so I definitely wanted to ask nosy questions about that. And so each chapter in that book is about a different way that people have been able to successfully monetize their businesses. And I was able to be like very precise about like, well, how did you do that? And then what? And then what next? And so I used it as kind of my playbook. So I think a lot of the reason why I've been able to like modularize it or create a structure is that I needed to do that for myself. I needed to learn it for myself. And then I wanted to convey it properly to others.
Which you do so well. And when you were building out these modules, so did you do the book? Here's what I have a question. When you think of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is one of the best books ever written, like arguably, that was a course first and then became a book. But a lot of what you've done is a book and then becomes a course. Do you think there's one way that's better than another way, or?
It's a good question. I mean, it is true that teaching the material over time enables you to know it so well and practice it in front of so many people that, you're saying it in just the right way. So I think, honestly, if I was advising somebody, I'd probably say, you know what? Yeah, teach it first. And then you'll know, you'll know all of the questions that people have. You'll know the places they get confused so that you can circumvent it. I have a good friend named Michael Bungay Stanier who has been very successful with a book of his called The Coaching Habit, which has sold over 1 million copies. Yeah. And, I was just with him last weekend, and he was saying that part of why he thinks The Coaching Habit was so effective was that it just was the material he had been teaching for years. And so he knew it cold, and he was able to put it in these like very understandable, very digestible ways. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I will say, for me, it's true. Like, it's a little bit chicken or egg. I needed the books, I'll be honest, to sort of establish my reputation. So, I got the books out there, but it's true. Like, Stand Out, my book, in many ways is the inspiration for my course, Recognize Expert. But Recognize Expert has evolved so far beyond what Stand Out was, because in the intervening years, I have learned a lot. And, the problem with a book, if it's not self-published, is like, you can't really go back. I mean, I guess, maybe if it's like a second edition, like years later, but the book kind of is what it is, which I think is good. But yeah, I've learned a lot since then about just how to think about it. And so, I've continued to update the course in lots of ways, but the book is kind of like, I would say it's a very good first pass at the idea.
Yeah. But it's still worth buying. Everybody who's listening. Okay. Everybody who's listening, buy. Dory, I like wealth of knowledge, from courses to books to perseverance, your story of resilience and saying, hey, I'm going to get there. Here's my goal, way far out there. What can I do as little increments to make it happen is inspiring to all of us, because we all have our own version of this story and we live it in our own personal ways. So thank you for taking time today to educate all of us and just get up close and personal. It's meant a lot.
Thank you, Jen. Such a pleasure to talk with you. I really appreciate it.